Okay, I want to go over Common Sense by Thomas Paine. There's a picture of him. The main thing to know going into this document is that before Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, there were people quietly to themselves talking about breaking away from England, but for the most part, no one had brought it up in any capacity where the colonies were going to do anything about it. People were scared to bring it up, and more importantly, people loved their country. They loved England. And so even though England had been treating us poorly with all of the acts that you had in the notes leading up to this, people still very much wanted to stay part of England, even though they knew, based on John Locke's ideas, that it was time to break the social contract with them. So heading into Common Sense, nobody had really put their neck on the line and said it was time to break away. To better understand where Thomas Paine was coming from in writing Common Sense, I want to read the introduction here. It says, America's first bestseller, Common Sense, was written by a former customs collector who became one of the most admired and most hated people of his day. His words persuaded thousands of colonists to support independence, but his outspoken views also made many bitter enemies. Born in England in 1737, Tom Paine had little schooling and was unsuccessful in several jobs. After meeting Benjamin Franklin in London, Paine came to America in 1774 and began working as a journalist. So it's important to know that he really hadn't had a great life. He was born in England, so he was an Englishman. He came to America, though, with one of our leading patriots, Benjamin Franklin, and he just came in 1774, so he came right during all of those acts. So he was going to come from England, where people had a parliament that was working with the king, and people had some rights, to a colony where they felt those rights were not being given and they were being violated. So he was going to see firsthand the difference between the two, and that's going to lead him towards being a big voice in they're not being treated fairly in the colonies. Going on, it says his pamphlet Common Sense vigorously rejected keeping any ties with Britain. In its first 3 months, the pamphlet sold more than 100,000 copies. Thousands of colonists, including Washington and Jefferson, read Paine's arguments and agreed. This just goes to show that this was a bestseller, that almost all colonists read it, either by buying it or by reading their neighbor's copy. And our founding fathers read it as well and knew that it was something that needed to be done. The last paragraph just says that in the 1790s, Paine returned to Europe, got involved in the French Revolution, and was thrown in prison. Some influential friends from back in the United States got him out, but for the most part, he died miserably. His life started miserably. He had a little short bit in the middle where he was famous and important, and to us, it means everything, because he's the voice that started us on our road to revolution. So here is Common Sense. And so here we go with Common Sense. The first thing to know as you go into this is it's a guy challenging everyone to a fight. It's someone trying to challenge people to do something. And so it might not seem like it's a lot of roast and someone challenging someone like we're used to today with the things we see on Twitter and Snapchat and things like that. But this is definitely something at the time that would have been seen as a very in-your-face type of pamphlet. So we start with Common Sense. It says, in the following pages, I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense. What Paine is saying here is that this is simple. It is plain. It's something that everyone should understand, and it's like common sense. Everybody should have it. What he's trying to say here is, if you don't agree with what I've written here, that's simple and plain that everyone gets, you're a moron. You're an idiot. So he's kind of, at the beginning, being very persuasive and trying to say this is something that everybody should agree with and understand, and if you don't, you're a moron. And so that's kind of a really startling first line. From there it goes, the authority of Great Britain over this continent is a form of government which sooner or later must have an end. That's the thesis. In English papers, you're always supposed to have a thesis, let the reader know what they're going to be reading. This is his thesis. Right at the beginning, he says we need to break the social contract. He says England's power over us, their authority over us, must come to an end. And so that's a startling claim, because no one had come out and put their neck on the line yet to say that we need to break away. And that's why Common Sense is such an important document. He says it right here at the beginning. So that should have answered questions 1 through 3 on your worksheet. The rest of this paragraph answers 4 through 8. Paine goes on, men of passive tempers look somewhat lightly over the offenses of Britain, and still hoping for the best are apt to call out, come, come, we shall be friends again for all of this. If you have a passive temper, if you're a passive person, that means you would sit back and say, if someone slapped you in the face, you might say, it's okay. I'm not going to do anything about it. So in a way, that's somebody calling someone a wimp. He's saying that if you're a wimp, if you're a sissy, you're weak, you might look at all the things England has done, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, the Tea Act, the Boston Massacre. You would look at all of those things and say, let's still be friends with England. But he says, examine the passions and feelings of mankind, and then tell me whether you can hereafter love, honor, and faithfully serve the power that has carried fire and sword into your land. What he's trying to say here is, with fire and sword, that's war. And he's saying, try to look at this and say, can you love somebody that's at war with you? When we went to war with Osama bin Laden, after 9/11, nobody would have said, you know what, Osama bin Laden, he's a bad guy, he killed a bunch of Americans, but I think he's just misunderstood. Let's have him over for dinner and try to, tell him we forgive him. No one would say that. You don't really say you want to be friends with the people that are trying to kill you. And we're at war with England when this letter comes out. A lot of people think the war for independence starts with the Declaration of Independence. It started before we ever wrote the Declaration. So we're at war with England right now. Paine goes on, but if you say you can still pass these violations over, then I ask, has your house been burned? Are your wife and children destitute of a bed to lie on or bread to live on? So he's asked the question now, can you look over everything they've done? And if you say yes, can you say, but can I look over the fact that we're at war with them? And if you say yes, he says, okay, but now can I look over what if it was my family? Because a lot of people maybe haven't had anybody die. They haven't been affected yet. And he's saying, imagine if you were the one affected, would you still want to be friends with England? And he says, if you have looked at this and you can still shake the hands with the murderers, there's a strong word. He doesn't call them our brethren, our countrymen, our friends. He calls them murderers. He says, then you are unworthy of the name of husband, father, friend, or lover. And whatever may be your rank or title in life, you have the heart of a coward. The important thing here is, he says, if you can shake hands with the British, you're unworthy of the name husband, father, friend, or lover. A husband and a father is a man. He's saying you're not a man. You can think of all the nasty ways that someone might say someone's not a man in our world today. That's what he's saying here. And he says, whatever your rank or title in life, you're a coward. Ranks and titles usually go to military men. Our highest military officer at this time was George Washington. He is saying that I don't care if you're George Washington. If you want to stay English, you're less than a man. You're a sissy, you're a coward, you're a moron, you're a wimp, you're an idiot. This is a pretty incendiary statement, and he's just trying to let everybody know it's time to break away, and I don't care who you are, it's time. And so now we get to the end of Paine's pamphlet and the end of our worksheet and these last two paragraphs. This next paragraph is important because Paine has challenged a lot of people. He's said a lot of nasty things, but now he says, I know why you're being wimps. I know why you're being cowards. He knows people aren't just doing it because they're bad people. He knows there's more to it. So he says, to talk of friendship with those in whom our reason forbids us to have faith and our affections instruct us to detest is madness and folly. So looking at this, reason comes from your head. Your reason is your brain. It's what your brain tells you to do. And he says your brain tells you don't have faith in these people. Looking back at our notes, with the Stamp Act, we asked them to stop. They passed the Tea Act. With the Tea Act, we asked them to stop. The Boston Massacre occurred. With the Boston Massacre, then we get into the Intolerable Acts. Every time we've asked them to stop or we stood up to them, they've come back with something harsher. Your brain would tell you this group is never going to stop harming you. And then he goes on your affection. That's your heart, comes from your heart. It tells you to detest these people. If someone treats you bad every day and always steps on you, your heart tells you that hurts. They don't love me. I feel bad. And so what he's just saying here is use your brain, use your heart. These people are not your friends anymore. They're not your government. He says, if you think that, he says it's madness and folly, meaning you're crazy. You're nuts. You can think of it as, if you had a friend who every day kicked you in the butt and stole your money, you probably would say I shouldn't be their friend anymore. They hurt my feelings, and my brain tells me that they're a jerk. That's what he's saying is happening here. So now he goes on, but then why are we still their friends? And the last line says, every day wears out the little remains of kindred between us and them. And kindred is your family, your kin is your family. And that's the key. He says, England is our home country. It's where we still have relatives that live and friends that live. And to give up on them hurts. But he says it's time, because every day they treat us like crap. They're no longer our kindred. They're no longer our friends. They're our enemy. And we need to go to war and end this. And so that's kind of where common sense comes to its conclusion, where he says, if you want to stay part of England, you're nuts, but I get why you do, but it's just time. And the final paragraph is simply just Paine saying that the rest of the world has given up on freedom. Many places are colonized. People are not treated fairly. And he says, let's be the one place in the world where people will stand up for freedom and rights and what people deserve. And the last paragraph is just kind of neat in that it's kind of saying what America becomes. We become this place of freedom and rights and hope, and a place that other people can look at and say, that's what we want. And he saw back in 1776 that that's what this was going to do. And he was right. This is a great letter, great pamphlet. I wish we could have read it out loud in class. I really like to get into it. It's a guy calling another guy out in a gas station parking lot. If you've ever seen a fight, this is what it is. It's a guy standing up and saying, you suck, and the other, and you've treated me like crap, and I'm ready to fight. And it's just a heck of a letter. It gets everybody fired up. And the Second Continental Congress takes this letter, and a month or so later, Richard Henry Lee stands up in the Second Continental Congress and says these states should and ought to be independent. And that's the day we become, the United States. It leads to the Declaration of Independence. Eventually the war ends, and that's how it goes. So this is a great letter. I hope you enjoyed reading it. We didn't get to do it as well as we would have in class, but hey, it's the way it is. So use this worksheet here to go over your or use this video to go over your worksheet and kind of check your answers. I'll check a few just kind of for completion. And make sure if you have any questions on your test this week, let me know. Thanks.